It is my great pleasure to introduce Dr. Nannette Santoro. Dr. Santoro is professor and E. Stewart Taylor Chair of the Department of Obstetrics and Gynecology at the University of Colorado School of Medicine. She has authored more than 200 research papers and chapters in 3 books. Her research has been continuously funded for more than 25 years, which is impressive in this funding climate, primarily by the National Institutes of Health. And her major research interests include reproductive aging and menopause, and the role of obesity in reproduction in women and its consequences for pregnancy. She serves on a number of editorial boards for major medical journals, including Menopause, and she is past officer and a board member of the American Board of Obstetrics and Gynecology. She serves as the national chair of the steering committee for the NIH-funded Reproductive Medicine Network and is past secretary treasurer of the American Association of Obstetricians and Gynecologists Foundation. She's a member of the Council of University Chairs of Obstetrics and Gynecology. She is past president of Women in Endocrinology and was vice president for the clinical science at the Endocrine Society from 2010 to 2013 and has been an active member of the North American Menopause Society since 1994. She currently serves on its board of directors. Dr. Santoro was the recipient of the 2004 NAMS Warner-Chilcott Perimenopause Research Award and the 2015 Society for Women's Health Research Achievement Award, as well as the 2016 Endocrine Society Mentor Laureate Award. We are very, very happy to have Dr. Santoro here to discuss the reprometabolic syndrome, how obesity harms reproduction, and what we can do about it. That's all. Welcome, Dr. Santoro.
Thank you for that lovely introduction. It's really a pleasure to be here. I've never been to the Penn State campus, and I had the opportunity to Google and learn what a Nittany lion is, which I had never known before, even though I lived in New Jersey for many years. And just to see your beautiful campus, although it was only at nighttime. But clearly at the inn, the person who checked me in was so proud of the campus that she immediately pulled out a map and was highlighting all the places I should go. So what I'd like to do in the next few minutes is to talk with you about how obesity is detrimental to the hypothalamic pituitary axis, to look at some of the clinical trials that have been done on weight loss with obesity. So this is kind of the opposite of what a lot of people here do, because you're really looking more at energy drain from exercise. I'm looking at energy excess, and see if there's a research agenda or some clinical ways that we can help deal with that. And let's see. This isn't moving forward, weirdly, but
I think if you click on the mouse,
it should?
Oh,
okay. Yeah, it's kind of, it's not resuming.
Okay, sorry about that.
Okay. Did it move? No.
No.
That's okay. Oh, I can just do it that way.
Well, it's not coming forward.
Okay.
Spacebar? Try spacebar. Nope. All right. Anyone want to call 0 for the technical people? Because I'm not sure what's going on.
Okay. We can keep going. Maybe not.
It's not.
It's not going on here at all.
Yeah, it's moving forward here.
Now we have it moving forward on the...
Let's try to close out.
Should we go out?
Yeah, let's close out and go again. Here's the presentation.
Slideshow.
Okay. Oh, you can do it down there. Okay, try
that. That looks more like it.
Better. Okay.
Okay.
All right.
We're back in business.
Yep. Okay.
Okay. I have no disclosures. So I probably don't need, I'm preaching to the choir by telling you all about the prevalence of obesity, but in 1999, the prevalence of a BMI over 30 was under 20% in all the blue states or lighter than blue, which are mostly west and northeast, and about a 20 to 24% prevalence in the rest of the country. And by 2008, look at how that map has changed. So we now have a prevalence rate that's over 30% in certain parts of the country of BMI greater than 30. And Colorado, you can see, is the lone remaining state that was under 20%. And the reason I'm showing you the 2008 numbers is that in the most recent numbers from 2014, I believe, Colorado has finally started to turn yellow. So obesity continues to increase in prevalence, and we need to think a little more about how this poses challenges for reproduction. So in what I do, which is reproductive medicine, we've noted a couple of key clinical consequences of reproduction that are important. So there's a delay in conception. Women who are obese have about a 34% reduction in fecundability, about 3% per BMI unit over 25. They have a greater rate of pregnancy loss, more obstetrical complications than normal weight women. This includes more C-sections, more wound infections, more dysfunctional labor, and they have double the risk of having an obese child who's dysmetabolic. If they need any form of assisted reproductive technology, they typically get fewer eggs. If we do an IVF cycle, they have more canceled cycles, and it is generally harder to get them to respond to ovulation induction. So for a number of different reasons, we've got some problems here. So my group began looking at this as early as the early 2000s, when we started to notice that there was what I call relative hypogonadotropic hypogonadism. And it's uncompensated. So compared to normal weight women, obese women have lower gonadotropins. LH and FSH are both lower, as do obese men. When you look at their entire cycle, they have decreased progesterone in the luteal phase. They have longer menstrual cycles and more anovulatory cycles, and overall lower estradiol when you measure a serum level. One of my REI fellows then looked at this to look for fertility implications of this, and in the Swan Study, the study of women's health across the nation, which looked at women as they traversed the menopause, we began recruiting at age 45. We asked a question about adolescent body mass index, and we also asked questions about lifetime gravidity and parity. And his question was based on what we called high school BMI, which is really a terrible epidemiologic question to ask because not everybody goes to high school or completes it. So unfortunately, it's what we had to live with. If you look at the bottom at the high school BMI and you look at 18.5 as being the reference value, the risk of nulliparity, never having a baby, or nulligravidity, never being pregnant, went up progressively with increasing BMI. And we do not think this is an effect of decreased frequency of sexual intercourse, because there's other studies, not in Swan, but in other studies that indicate that that is not linked to body weight. Then we began looking at urinary hormones through an entire menstrual cycle in women. So women collected a daily first morning void of their urine for menstrual cycle to menstrual cycle, so bleed to bleed, or up to 50 days if they did not bleed. And this shows you the ovulatory cycles in this group of women. It's about 700 women, and the BMI groups are less than 25, 25 to 29.9, and 30 plus. And that's approximately tertiles in this early part of the Swan Study. So these are women in their mid-40s. And what you can see going on the upper left to right is LH and FSH, and on the bottom is estrogen and progesterone, and these are urinary metabolites of estradiol and progesterone, so estrone sulfate or estrone conjugates and pregnenyl glucuronide. The most striking change that you can see when you organize all of these data by the day 0, which is the day of ovulation or mid-cycle, is that the PDG curve reflecting progesterone secretion drops by about 30 to 40%. So the mid part of that curve is pretty significant. When you look at the area under the curve, that is a highly significant difference. Of course, when you have almost 800 women in your sample, everything is significant. Even the estrogen looked like it was lower, although I question whether that's clinically meaningful. And if you look at the beginning of the cycle in the upper right corner at the FSH also, especially in that early follicular phase of the cycle around menses, when we really see higher levels in perimenopausal women, is significantly lower in the obese women. So it looks like it's dose-related, and with increasing body weight, also it gets lower. So we next wanted to look at what gonadotropin secretion looked like, because this is a picture that we often see in women who are undernourished or who are exercising too much. The hormones are reduced, they have this luteal phase defect type of a phenotype, and in that situation we know that LH pulse frequency is slowed, that the central neural drive for reproduction restrains the hypothalamus, less frequent hormone production. When we looked at obese women, we did not see that. So we saw something quite different. And if you see the controls on top in the obese women, this is just a single participant, a woman with high BMI on the bottom. The pulse frequency is exactly the same, and this has been reproduced in a number of additional studies that we've done, but the amplitude is decreased. So there's a dampening of pulsatile LH secretion, not a frequency problem. Now that could still be hypothalamic, but I'll get to that. Our next step was to see if we could change this phenotype if we were able to accomplish weight loss. Since nobody on a study section would believe that I could conduct a weight loss trial successfully, being a reproductive endocrinologist, we went to the next best thing, which was surgically induced weight loss as our model. So we knew that we would have people who lost weight, and we tried to sample women before and after they had surgically induced weight loss and repeated this type of study. So here we are sampling blood every 10 minutes for, I think it was 8 hours, and when you look at the same study before and after weight loss, you can see that the pre-weight loss study in blue has lower LH, and the post-weight loss study looks a little bit better. It starts to normalize, and that's what we saw overall in the group of women we studied. Our goal was to do this as a paired study, but we were very surprised to see that women, after they have surgically induced weight loss, were not that interested in following up with the medical profession. They were kind of done with us. So we wound up doing 2 groups more than we were able to do paired pre and post. But we were heartened to see this return to normal, and I should point out that the BMI, what you can see here, that pre-op and post-op, we went from a BMI of 47, so these are women with very high BMIs, it was 35. So they did not go down to a normal BMI of 25 or less, but they did have a very significant drop, and that's why they don't leap back to an entirely normal-looking curve. And I dropped one of the numbers on there, sorry about that. But we saw some changes in LH. LH went up, as we would hope, so they were hypo, and we see LH go up. FSH went up marginally. We weren't able to show a statistically significant increase in that. But you can see that our post-op numbers are tiny. We only had 6 women that we could get in post-op. And their luteal phase progesterone curves also went up. So that luteal phase phenotype, that defect, seemed to correct or improve with weight loss. And when you look at the whole cycle hormones, and again, everything is normalized here. These are daily urines, normalized to cycle day 0, which is the approximate time of ovulation. The shaded area in the background are women with a BMI of 25 or less. And the pre-op and post-ops are shown by the different colors. So LH overall went up a little bit post-op. Progesterone went up, PDG, very significantly, but again, you can see it's not really normalizing. It's heading back towards normal. We didn't see much in FSH, and here, very paradoxically, after weight loss, we saw estrone go down. So estrone was significantly lower and not higher. It actually deviated more from normal. And I still don't have an explanation for that. And again, we wondered if it was the loss of fat and muscle that may have made a difference, but we really don't know. So we felt that we had demonstrated at this point that there was hypogonadotropic hypogonadism. Where are the reproductive challenges in obesity? Well, probably they're everywhere. We were mostly interested in the hypothalamus and pituitary. How many of you are familiar with I Heart Guts? Oh, it's a great website. It has these really cute, so these are all the organs from I Heart Guts. I forget what the hypothalamus is called, but the pituitary is called Glandmaster Flash. And the ovary is an overachiever. So we do have some evidence, and I think I include a little bit of that later, that the ovary and endometrium are also affected, because one can only wonder that if these patterns of low progesterone are present, how does that set up a pregnancy? And are we looking in the wrong place if we start looking in the second trimester trying to intervene? So in order to try to distinguish between a hypothalamic or pituitary effect of obesity, we gave weight-based doses of GnRH to women with obesity and to normal weight women. And what we saw was a pretty clear-cut effect on the pituitary gland. So for a weight-based dose of 75 nanograms per kilogram, which is approximately physiologic, you can see in the normal weight women in green a much higher response to GnRH, and the women with obesity in red. And what's really interesting that you can see on this slide that has plagued the research that we've been doing is that my women with obesity are very, very similar. You can see these tiny error bars in the group with obesity. This experiment is better than a lot of the other ones we do, but our normal weight group is all over the place. So that has been just one of the things that's perplexed me as we've gone through this, that we have wide variation in our normal weight women, but the obese women seem to have very, very similar hormone patterns. So just to summarize so far, the hypogonetropic hypogonadism of obesity appears related to the excess adiposity because it corrects with weight loss. The site of the defect is pituitary, and of course there may be other places where there's reproductive dysfunction. So we tried to reason around where this might be happening. Because the pituitary gland is exposed to the systemic circulation, we looked for circulating factors. What could be circulating that's causing a problem? The two things that we thought of were insulin and glucose. But because I spent 10 years at Einstein with Dan Stein, who trained in the Brown and Goldstein lab and was always talking about the role of free fatty acids in diabetes. I think he needed a little sign over his door saying it's the free fatty acids, stupid. And also inflammatory factors were the things that we considered. And we had measured inflammatory factors in our other studies, and systemically they're not that helpful to us because they always kind of went in the inspected direction, but which came first, the chicken or the egg? We couldn't be sure. Is it just because they were less obese if they lost weight? We didn't know. So we looked for the critical mediators in obesity. One of the things that confused us is if anyone has read the literature on insulin and its effects on pituitary gonadotropin secretion, I share your pain. It's not even clear if the pituitary is insulin resistant. There is a Pituitary mouse, but the clinical data are pretty conflicting. So insulin resistance, we know in obesity is tissue specific, but we couldn't be sure of the role that insulin might be playing. We know inflammatory cytokines are elevated, but they're much more elevated in the fat itself, so we were not sure how that might mediate pituitary dysfunction. But we knew that free fatty acids were very powerful inducers of endoplasmic reticulum stress. So we wondered if they were doing something as well and activating the unfolded protein response and causing problems with pituitary secretion. So we cooked up a hypothesis that insulin and free fatty acids together might be at fault. And again, thinking the chance that I was going to convince a study section to give me a grant for this hunch was pretty unlikely. And here is where having a Center for Women's Health Research comes in really handy, because I think it was at a Center for Women's Health Research meeting where I was lamenting the fact that no one is going to let me infuse insulin and free fatty acids to normal weight women, when Wendy Court, who's one of the members of the center in geriatrics, said, oh, well, one of my mentees, Irene Schauer, has a set of controls that she did exactly that in a diabetes study. So from this was born some opportunistic research. So we were able to generate preliminary data from her controls. She was looking at something entirely different, but she had relatively frequent sampling. It was every hour, which was enough for us to see. And she had given free fatty acids and a pretty hefty insulin dose and a hyperinsulinemic euglycemic clamp, pretty much exactly what we were thinking of doing. And when we looked at that, what we saw was that short-term exposure to both insulin and free fatty acids, but not either one alone, seemed to be what you needed to drop LH and FSH. And she had men and women in the study, and we saw the similar effects in the men as well as the women. So what you can see in these two slides are LH on the left, FSH on the right, and the conditions. So saline, lipid alone did nothing. Insulin alone not significant, and the saline and lipid plus insulin groups were significantly different. So we jumped for joy and took that preliminary data as fast as we could into an R01, and our working paradigm was that hyperinsulinemia plus elevated free fatty acids would cause this suppression of LH and FSH, and again, reduce GnRH response so we could isolate the pituitary gland. So in addition to reproducing the short-term model, which is all well and good, we have another second ambitious aim, which is to try to induce, not obesity, but to induce diet-induced reproductive dysfunction by giving women an isocaloric, and the emphasis here is on isocaloric because clearly no IRB and no participant is going to be eating a high-fat diet and gain weight voluntarily. So we are giving a 50% calories from fat diet for 1 month to a group of women, and we're going to look for the same readout to see if we can cause the same problems. So our hypothesis was that combining the insulin and free fatty acids together would be sufficient to transiently decrease LH and FSH in normal weight women. And we're in the middle of doing this crossover study right now where we're giving insulin plus free fatty acids or saline in random order at consecutive cycles whenever possible in the early follicular phase of the menstrual cycle, so we're standardized in terms of when they are getting this exposure, doing frequent sampling for 10 minutes for, I think we're doing 4 hours, and then a single dose of GnRH of 75 nanograms per kilogram, and following that out for another 2 hours to see what happens. So we're very excited to see that it looks, this is a single normal weight woman. We were high-fiving at this point, but your initial data is always too good to be true. In the control state, when she just got saline, compared to the insulin and free fatty acids, which you can see at about 120 minutes when you equilibrate on the clamp, that it looks like LH is dropping, and this is just LH data. The FSH data are similar, but it's got a longer half-life, so it's not as exciting to show. But the response to GnRH is clearly massively attenuated in this one woman. And this is where we are now. We're up to 6 participants. We're planning to get to 10. But this is the mean effects of saline and lipid, and the lipid is in red. And again, we see this very attenuated response to GnRH, so it looks like at least over the short term, we've induced the state that we were expecting to do and can reproduce this defect in normal weight women. So we're very excited to go on to the real life exposure of the high-fat diet, isocaloric high-fat diet, to see if that's going to have a similar effect. And lest you think I spend all of my time in the hypothalamus and pituitary, which I do, but my group does not, the ovary is also a locus of action for subfertility. And other groups, such as Kelly Moley at WashU, have shown profound effects on oocyte mitochondria as a result of high fat and high sugar. Her models use incredibly high fat and high sugar. Dr. Gosha Skaznik-Wickel at Colorado is currently an AAOGF grant awardee, feeding a high-fat diet to mice who become obese. The mice actually sort into 2 groups after high-fat feeding. There's the lean mice who will not get fat, and then there's the obese mice. So she looks at both groups, and high-fat diet-fed mice, whether or not they become obese, have a decrease in anti-Müllerian hormone, reflecting a decrease in ovarian reserve or decreased activation of ovarian follicles and decreased follicle numbers. She also shows increased atretic follicles, and in her model of a fat-6 mouse, which converts omega-6 fatty acids to omega-3 fatty acids, you do not see these effects. The mice become obese, but there's no adverse effects. So she's beginning to narrow it down into what types of fatty acids may be an issue, and she, along with Alex Polatsky, the fellow who did the high school BMI study earlier on, are looking at the effects of omega-3 as protective of the ovary in this setting. So I'm going to show you a little bit of her data. These are the C57 black 6 mice that she induces obesity. So she uses 60% calories from fat. It's pretty amazing, although one of my consultants, Teresa Powell, who does pregnancy research in Colorado, comes from Kentucky and says this might not be an unusual diet in Kentucky. So the low-fat diet has only 10% calories from fat. And she's got high-fat lean, high-fat obese, and low-fat lean. So those are the three groups that you can see. In the weight gain over time, those high-fat lean animals really don't gain weight, which is pretty amazing. So they have some kind of protective mechanism from accruing adiposity, but it does not protect them in other key ways. So when you look at the number of ovarian follicles after 10 weeks on the diet, both primordial and growing follicles are decreased, and the low-fat lean, high-fat lean, and high-fat obese are the three colors of bars going left to right. Breeding is also an issue, the total number of litters per mouse. So even if you are on the high-fat diet and you remain lean, you are not protected from a decrease in number of litters. Same thing with number of pups. So there's clearly an ovary toxic effect of the high-fat diet that really remains to be teased out. And scary as these data are, and really led to a lot of head-scratching for us, because the lower AMH and the lower number of follicles in the high-fat obese animals doesn't really square with what we see clinically, in that obese women with obesity do not have a earlier menopause than normal weight women. So we're not sure why that's the case. And there's other evidence. So other groups, Rob Norman in Australia is another very active investigator in this area, who's looking at direct lipotoxicity in the ovary. And you see some different effects. More follicular fluid calcium at the higher the BMI, and one of the ER stress markers, ATF4, goes up from overweight to obese women. And this is follicle fluid taken at the time of an IVF cycle. And similarly, when you look at other things that are potential problems, follicular fluid triglycerides are higher in women of higher BMI, sex hormone binding globulin lower, free androgen index is higher, which we know, and C-reactive protein, one of your sort of standard markers. And there's more. So these are kind of all what you would expect: free fatty, follicular fluid insulin, glucose, lactate goes up. And the lactate to glucose ratio goes down. So you've got an anaerobic follicle. So in summary, too much fat leads to excess inflammation, fat deposition in metastatic locations. Hepatic fat, pericardial fat, and muscle fat. Can metastatic fat affect the ovary? Not really known. One of the questions that we were asked by Terry Nett, who's a GnRH researcher actually at Colorado State, when we were presenting some of these data, was that in animals, the fat pads around the ovary are really huge, and it's quite possible that they're exerting some kind of direct effect. So we continue with these areas of research, but in the meantime, we have a huge clinical issue on our hands, and as a reproductive endocrinologist, there's a lot of pressure to design clinical interventions. So the least complicated option by far is the prevention of obesity, which we're really not doing a great job on, although it looks like this year we were just able to bend the curve of childhood obesity, which is encouraging. Once obesity has occurred, it is so much harder to change lifestyle, and it's not even clear that this is beneficial. And I'm going to show you some studies that really are kind of concerning. So one of the first studies that was done was Rob Norman in Australia, very low calorie diet on IVF outcomes. I believe this was it was a 500 calorie a day diet. Anybody ever been on a 500 calorie a day diet? No, it's going to make you mean. It's not, that doesn't seem good. So these women lost 2.2 to 8.8% of their body weight over 4 to 6 weeks. Pretty impressive crash diet. But many women stopped. And what they noted was that they had to stop the trial because there was such a poor IVF outcome, very low oocyte numbers, poor oocyte quality, and low fertilization. So the, just bite the bullet, do a really aggressive diet, not going to work. So the next study that came out was a more sensible diet, and this was Mustert's from the Netherlands. He did a randomized trial of a lifestyle program that involved a more moderate, behavior-oriented weight loss program. And this lasted for several months, and then women were given conventional fertility treatment. And in the intent to treat analysis, what you can see is that the intervention group, these are two life tables for conception, and wow, this is so tiny, I can hardly read it. And live birth. So, and a viable birth of a singleton at term is on the top, because that's the new good outcome for fertility studies. The intervention group did worse. It almost did significantly worse. It just was barely not statistically significant. So that weight loss in this study was not particularly helpful once again. So this is very concerning because these behavioral methods are pretty, tried and true, and they seem like the most sensible things to do. So there's some good news coming from Hershey, Pennsylvania. Rick LeGros is an investigator who's been doing a number of studies in this area. So the OWL study, and this was confined to women with polycystic ovary syndrome who have insulin resistance as part of their syndrome and anovulation. But he looked at reproductive aged women with PCO, BMI range of 27 to 42. They went on a 16-week program, and he had 3 groups. The lifestyle modification was set to achieve a 7% weight loss, and one group just received oral contraceptives, and a third group received both interventions. He had good adherence, so this was a standard kind of diabetes prevention program type of protocol. Women got a meal replacement bar once a day. They were supposed to do steps, and there was decent adherence to the protocol. Both of the lifestyle groups came pretty close to the target. They lost 6 to 6.5% of body weight, which really shows you the motivation of women who want to get pregnant. And that's quite good. Cumulative ovulation was good. It was best on the lifestyle plus oral contraceptives, and the live birth showed a trend for improvement. And this just shows you the Kaplanmeier curves by the treatment groups. So the blue line is the OCPs, oral contraceptives plus lifestyle, doing better than the other groups, but lifestyle doing pretty good here. So in the Reproductive Medicine Network, Dr. LeGros is currently leading a trial of weight loss in women who are seeking fertility, who are obese, using a very similar type of a paradigm. And I can't tell you anything yet. We're almost done with the study, but we have to follow them all out to live birth. And we've got, looks like good adherence. So it looks like the adherence to the protocol will be similar because we can see the steps by group and the weight loss by group. So what do we do with this information clinically? I am a big believer in trying to improve metabolism before one tries to get pregnant. So I am hoping that lifestyle is going to have a role here. And in general, what we do in clinical practice is small multiple lifestyle changes. And Colorado has a very active wellness program. Alex Polatsky runs a program called Wi-Fi, which is a very cute acronym. It's something weight, something fertility initiative. But patients that go into that program are referred, and they're given a choice they go through the readiness for change model. Fitness is emphasized because, hey, it's Colorado. Everyone likes that, and fitness is very easy there. You just drive a half an hour and you can climb a 14,000-foot mountain. And caloric restriction seems to be effective no matter how you do it, so we will often tell patients to do whatever they have to do, although based on some of the high-fat information we have, I'm thinking that the Atkins-type diet may not be the best thing for them. But any way that they can lose weight seems to be beneficial for the metabolic markers. And frequent follow-up every 2 to 4 weeks. And we consider having a patient contract. How many of you use the self-monitoring tools? These can be extremely helpful. I myself was saved in the airport from eating the noodles that I thought were a better calorie choice and not getting the egg roll that I really wanted. When I looked it up, I saw the egg roll was actually half the calories of the noodles and enjoyed my egg roll, which was really great. And this just lets you, for those of you who don't know, you can figure out how to do it. And if you're like my husband who plays for the tie all the time, he looks at exactly how many calories he's expending in exercise and will eat up to that to zero it out. So even if you're normal weight, it can be handy. But I would have to say that more and more we are relying on surgery to accomplish weight loss, and here we have a discrepancy. Although the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services approves this clinically, how many of you are clinicians in the audience and see patients? How much trouble do you have getting this approved for individual patients? I have a tremendously difficult time with insurance companies approving it. But when a BMI is over 35, it's unlikely that you're going to come down effectively and lose enough weight to lose some of the metabolic disadvantage unless a surgical option is considered. And the BMIs between 30 and 35 are supposed to be covered with coexisting morbidity. But again, my clinical experience has been different. And we have very limited literature on what happens in terms of pregnancy outcomes. There was a few years ago, I think there was a review in JAMA, and they tried to look at the world's evidence. But again, my own experience with really poor patient follow-up is pretty common. So I am not sure that we have such great outcome data. We know what we're getting from the people who report, but otherwise, not so clear. So just in summary, I don't think I have to convince you. I think you see this all the time. And as I was talking to my driver from the Jitney, Pennsylvania is one of the larger states in the union. So high BMIs are not unusual here. Obesity is highly prevalent. I think you're always better than Mississippi. It's always worse in Mississippi. So I think that's probably your consolation here. But it's extraordinarily difficult to treat. Colorado went on a very big, long behavioral weight loss initiative. We hosted The Biggest Loser. And did all of you see that JAMA paper about the Biggest Losers a couple of years later? They gained it back, and their metabolism slowed. So we really don't know what we need to know about how to treat this problem. Yet, at the same time, we know and are learning more and more about the specific effects of obesity on the reproductive axis, which may be setting up pregnancies very poorly. So identifying and treating these adverse effects on reproduction early, nipping it in the bud, may be very important in terms of the next generation and the consequences of subsequent epigenetic modifications that seem to be where the problem is, because clearly a rise in obesity this fast cannot be genetic, it must be epigenetic. And with that, I want to thank you, and this is the wonderful team of people that I get to work with every day who do a lot of the work on the studies that I've showed you. Thanks so much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Dr. Santoro, for that talk. We're really, really interested in that. I wanted to open it up for questions, so hopefully we can have an interesting discussion.
Yes, this is very interesting from the perspective what I'm learning from looking at the proteomics of vulvodynia, which is neuroinflammation. The fact that neuroinflammation has a memory, the brain has a memory. So your question was, do we do follow-up long enough? We learned from the vulvodynia, most recent paper on just vasculectomy, that the improvement rate is 70% in 1 year, and it rises to 90% in 5 years. So what it suggests that the brain's memory is remembering, and it takes time to get back to a normal, or what, allostasis, a more normal or more desirable level. So the question is it that CNS has a memory? We have to have longer term look at things in order to find out whether our treatment is effective or not. And maybe even the ovary has a memory.
Yeah, no, it's an important question, and I think that the longer we follow people up, the more we learn. the extraordinary things to me are that surgical weight loss is so effective and that it's effective behaviorally, because one of the things that's clear is behavioral weight loss is stressful, and stress may be bad for pregnancy. People who are constantly controlling themselves because their appetite is screaming at them, they've clearly reset, their body point. We're asking people to do something that's really almost impossible. So some way to remove, the drive to eat goes away when you do surgery. So we know we have gut signals we just don't know enough about that are probably driving some of this as well. And you're right. I mean, some of this is habitual, and the brain may have habituated to it. We know from some of the appetite suppressant drugs that, that's part of the issue. But there's still a lot to be done. I was very unhappy to hear that a major pharma company scrapped their entire appetite suppressant program because the drugs have so many off-target effects.
Other questions? Thank you so much. So I was wondering if you could share a little bit about what women's reactions are when you tell them that their weight may actually be affecting their ability to get pregnant. Are they usually surprised? Do they know it? Or if you can just kind of talk clinically what that's like.
Yeah, it really varies, because a lot of times, we tell the trainees that, you need to point this out to patients. And it's very difficult to do without them feeling like you're fat shaming them. So staying away from that kind of language is really important. I use high BMI, and we talk about it. We have a weight limit in our group that we do not want to do IVF for safety reasons in women with BMIs over 45. And I have 2 patients that I'm going to have to convince my group to do IVF on them because they are not going to lose weight. One woman has a hypothalamic problem, and the other woman has tried and just keeps crying in my office every time I say it. So they can't. I think trying to address, are the emotional eaters? What are the drivers? Because if they're kind of binge eaters, you may have a chance to help reduce the behavior. If they really have no insight at all or no idea how their weight just keeps, climbing and climbing, or they're just resistant to any activity, there isn't much that you can do. But usually we'll try a program and make a 5% weight goal, and then I'll see the patient frequently. If they have any glimmer of dysmetabolism, I will add metformin. I try to give them something that's going to make it a little bit easier to stimulate the weight loss. And if they have tried multiple times before to lose weight, it's probably futile. We're probably not going to get anywhere. And if they say to me, look, I've tried this, it's not happening. I had one patient years ago who was 4'11", weighed about 320 pounds. Her husband was a chef. She helped him in his work. And she just looked at me and said, no, I'm not going to lose any weight, so you're either going to treat me or not.
Thank you. My question is, the extent to which your trials have involved largely preconception, so women who are trying to become pregnant versus those who are interconception, and if you have included any women who have had a pregnancy, have had a live birth, and then conducted the trial, do you see a parity difference, whether it be protective or enhanced, just the fact of pregnancy potentially changing the biology, the physiology, as well as potentially learning adaptive strategies, weight management within pregnancy, if any of those differences have emerged?
That's a good question. We have not looked at, we haven't really thought much about, the current study we're doing, but we really do want to get into the business of preconception. We're doing that mostly through our infertility practice more than anything else, because trying to get women off the street preconception when 50% of pregnancies are unplanned is pretty challenging. So we need big money to do that. We're trying to get it.
Yeah, interconception then becomes the place. They've had a successful pregnancy, but yet gained a lot of weight in pregnancy.
Yes.
And now have
Yeah.
second fertility.
And we do have a women's health scholar, Jacinda Nicholas, who's doing that actually in conjunction with Ellen Seeley at Brigham and in Colorado in 2 different populations, specifically targeting postpartum women with an app. And she's having decent uptake for it. It's hard to get people to recruit because postpartum women are the forgotten women. They kind of disappear. And we always have this magic thing in OBGYN that you don't see them for 6 weeks. Well, they really don't want to see you. They're not sleeping, they're adjusting. But it really probably makes a lot of sense to see them sooner, especially for research purposes. And she is finding that they're amenable if you make it very easy. So using electronic ways of communicating is probably the way we're going to do it.
Thank you for that presentation. I was just wondering, as far as once you monitor these patients both following bariatric surgery, has there been any attempt to correlate their FH and LSH levels with their insulin levels and free fatty acids levels post-operatively? And then secondly, can you comment on the fact of what type of surgical intervention was performed, since there's a different number of obviously bariatric surgical approaches, and does that make any difference?
Yeah, thanks for asking. We looked primarily at Roux-en-Y, and yes, it does make a difference just in terms of the efficacy of the weight loss. We were mostly interested in them. They had to lose 25% of their starting weight, and they had to be weight stable before we restudied them. And we did not look at insulin because we brought them in for random bloods. We mostly looked at their urine assays. So we didn't look at just a static home insulin level because our sample size would be too small to see anything. So unless we were going to do a hyperinsulinemic clamp, we were not going to get a lot of information. And at that time, unfortunately, we were not smart enough to pull up their free fatty acids, but we did a bunch of cytokines. And I don't know if it's still good, but if we had some serum, it might be helpful. I think we got fasting bloods on all of them.
Hi, I'm really interested in your free fatty acid study, and I was curious about when you did the infusion, which fatty acids were in the infusion, and then the second part of that is, do you know if women who are obese have elevated free fatty acids, and if so, which fatty acids are elevated?
Well, they can be just about anything. The lipid preparation that we're giving now is intralipid, and it's a lot of omega-6 fatty acids. And I'm just kind of getting into fatty acid world, and we're doing lipidomics on the serum now so that we're going to really, try to nail that down. Because, the world is kind of separating into the good and bad free fatty acids, but it's not that simple. So, we're trying to look at exactly what the profile is so we can see what may have been most damaging, because most of the women that we're actually recruiting for this study are very slender, athletic women who eat fairly low fat. And it'll be interesting to see what their fat profiles are once we're done with the lipidomics. But that's the most I can tell you right now.
So I'm interested in counseling. So I was thinking this something that you alluded to, which is how do you counsel about high-fat diets for women who may be interested in fertility? Because it seems like there are two elements. There's, of course, the obesity itself, and then there may also be dietary fat content. And yet a lot of patients are saying that either high-fat diets or certainly low-carbohydrate diets are the ones that they feel better on. So I'm just curious about your thoughts on that.
Yeah, well, I used to be very fixated on the weight itself, that losing the weight mattered and BMI mattered, but some of this research is making me more leery of the high-fat diets. I generally used to tell patients just do whatever you hate less. However you can make it work. Either reduce your calories across the board. There's now alternate day fasting that some people can do better with than others. Do low fat, do low carbs. If you want to eat the grapefruit whatever diet or the cayenne pepper diet, try it if you can lose weight. But I am kind of steering them away from high fat, because if they lose on a high fat diet, then you're going to kind of want them to switch off that when they're ready to get pregnant, and that'll probably just lead to weight regain. So I don't know if that's going to be so helpful.
Additional questions?
I'm sort of wary of the word lifestyle, and I would like to substitute for it cultural lifestyle, because lifestyle puts the onus on the individual, and it's really our culture that is problematic. So would something like getting these women together and having developing focus groups culture groups within our larger obesogenic culture.
Yeah, no, I think it's a good point.
It's blaming the patient that is sort of, I think, wrong.
Yeah, no, it's a good point. It's a good point that you make. We live in places where there's no place to walk. There's no place in the neighborhood to walk. I mean, I worked in Newark, New Jersey for years, and we would see women that wanted to lose weight, and we'd say, okay, get more active. And in their neighborhoods, they were not going into the parks to walk after work.
Calorie count on our overall pound.
Uh-huh. I think that's been a great step forward, is having calorie counts at least available to people. The other motto I like to tell people, if they really do want to make an overhaul in how they eat, is to eat food that looks like food. Because that's pretty simple.
In defense of and smaller plates.
Is there any independent effect of either activity or fitness level on fertility in obese women?
It's really not known. It's just not known if there's a counterbalance or fit. And in fact, that's one of the things that I'll take, because I believe they do better if they're fitter. And if they can't lose and they're frustrated, but they're more active, I really want to encourage that, because that can't be bad for them. It's good for endothelial function. It just can't be bad for them. So promoting fitness is never, it's never a bad prescription.
Hi, I have a thought. Thank you for your talk. I'm a clinical psychologist. My specialty is reproductive medicine. So my clinical practice is split pretty much between third-party and infertility patients. So I'm sort of throwing another challenge in the mix in that I see patients after their physician, their reproductive endocrinologist, has told them they need to lose weight prior to getting pregnant. And because these patients are experiencing depression and anxiety at such high levels, my experience sometimes as a clinician is sort of despair over the fact that they now have one more hurdle that they have to overcome prior to considering getting pregnant. The other issue is that often patients fake good to their reproductive endocrinologist in that they don't want you to know how badly they're feeling. So there's just this behavioral challenge that I don't have an answer to. I'm working with them behaviorally and psychologically, but it's just this kind of additional layer of the mental health piece underlying the behavioral challenge.
Yeah, no, I agree. And when I know there's a psychologist involved or there's a clinical issue, I usually will try to collaborate with that person, because then, usually you can figure out a drug therapy, if there's going to be drug therapy, something that won't interact, or certainly something that may be appetite reducing on top of that, so that the patient can have some success, because it's really such a daunting problem.
Okay. Any other questions from the group? Okay. Well, we're running a little bit ahead of schedule, but I'd like to take this opportunity to thank Dr. Santoro.
Thank you.